Okay. Barker is absent. Bonnet is absent. Fox.
Here.
Kauth. Kennedy is absent. McPherson.
Here.
Morgan. Pendrell.
Here.
Plucker is absent. Prestai.
Here.
Quinn.
Here.
Reddick.
Here.
Salgado is absent. Sotolongo is absent. Kratz.
Here.
First order of business is to recognize the Open Meetings Act, which is on the wall over here. If you have any questions regarding the Open Meetings Act, it's there for your review. Next is approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Reddick here, motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. Who's the second?
McPherson.
Wow,
Okay.
so quickly forgot.
Okay. Next, we'll do committee reports.
Need a vote on your minutes.
We do need a vote, don't we? Okay. Let's vote.
Fox.
Aye.
McPherson.
Yes.
Morgan. Pendrell.
Yes.
Prestai.
Yes.
Quinn. Reddick.
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Now we go to the committee reports. And Bernardi, do you want to give some introduction on how we're going to proceed with the reports?
Sure.
If not, I can, but it's...
Obviously, as everybody will, Bernardi Nebush, Deputy City Attorney. As everyone will recall, last meeting, after the conclusion of the meeting, the committees were given an opportunity to meet and talk, and some committees I know have had the opportunity to meet in the interim as well or have additional discussions. So the thought process is that maybe each committee, and I know we've had a number of people who are ill today and have sent emails today indicating they couldn't attend, so our attendance is obviously down. But the hope is that a representative of the committee could give a short 1-2 minute broad overview of what the committee decided. Obviously, the committees that make recommendations for potential charter changes, those will come before you. What you have in items 5A through I today are many of the recommendations made by the Human Resources and Legislative Committee and by the Governance Structure Law Election Committee. That's where they come from, and I'm anticipate next meeting we'll have a number of recommendations from a couple of the other committees that I know are in the process of finalizing some things. So,
And also, Bernard, isn't it our thought on number 5, after we get through the governance on number 5, we'll go through, have a public, open that up to public comment, and then vote on those?
yeah, so I think what my hope was, or I think our hope was that each of the amendments are obviously a separate document. Most of them have a single amendment. Sometimes I have some alternative language because there have been a couple different thought processes that we would go through those, open a public hearing, allow members of the public who want to address that particular item to testify, then have discussion between the board, and then if it's the will of the Charter Convention to make that recommendation to the City Council, and we think it's ripe to do so, you could move to make that recommendation today, and that will be on the list of ones that are recommended. If you don't feel like you're ready to do it, obviously they can be laid over to the next meeting or other meetings. Or if you don't feel comfortable making a recommendation, obviously you may choose not to make a recommendation, but we'll have a number of recommendations that are going to need to go forward to the council, and I think the thought process is let's at least start the process. Most of these are relatively more benign than maybe less significant structural changes than some of the ones I think we're probably going to see in the coming weeks in some ways. So.
Okay, with that, let's start with committee reports. Anybody here from the Governance, Structure, Law, and Elections Committee that could speak to your discussions or your thoughts? Or
Fox, I'm the only, I think I'm the only member of that committee here. And I'm not prepared to really speak on all of the points. Kathleen I think she was gonna speak for us.
Okay.
So I'm just not prepared to really give a report today.
I will note for Mr. Fox that the amendments at the bottom, H and I, are the ones to 801 and 815. Those were recommendations that came out of the Governance Committee that are before you today. those were the only two recommendations that were specifically made by that committee. So we will have a chance to consider those.
Okay.
Okay, good. Next one is Administrative and Mayor's Office.
Redicare, I think I'm the only one from my committee who's here. There were some discussions that were passed on, just communicated, and I think they also communicated to Bernard kind of what the expectations were. A couple things that were discussed is really making the master plan more readily accessible. That was section 7.05. And also just about public engagement in the capital improvement plan, section 7.07. Three other items came up for discussion, but they were kind of tabled to our next committee meeting. One, the mayor's absence, which there's a lot of discussion around that as a whole, and mayor's disability. We may wrap those two into one item, and then some comments that were made before in regards to BID and how we can tie other things together. I do want to also reference, I think it was mentioned in the last meeting, which I was not absent for, but thank you again for the minutes, regarding arts and how other cities involve the arts in the community. I think that 1% is a good number. I've had a chance to do some research in other cities our size that's about the percentage that cities look at, in between 1% and 3%, depending on the city's GDP. But what we do uniquely in Omaha for, let's say, the fireworks stand that is required to go through other nonprofits, I think anytime we're going to involve city funds or other funds, and we have such a strong philanthropic community, we should continue to engage those nonprofits maybe that way, either as fiduciary agents for grants or something along those lines.
I believe in our ordinances somewhere we have a suggestion of maybe, I think, 1% for public art when developers come in and develop something. I'm pretty sure that hasn't always been enforced or pushed. Has in some occasions, in other occasions it has not. So, okay. Let's see, Finance and Miscellaneous. Anybody here?
Presti, so I took the notes from our conversation, so I saw the nods from my committee members who all do the report out, because I have it pulled up here. So we had quite a lot of conversation and had quite a few different recommendations that we bulked together into a couple buckets. Broadly speaking, though, and we're planning on meeting with Bernard later, so that we should have some formal recommendations next week for the full convention to consider. But a lot of conversation around the master plan and some different ways that that could be incorporated. So we'd definitely love to talk with Mr. Reddick and their committee to hear what their thoughts are there, because we have some suggestions there as well around making that review period, putting some type of review period on that where it's required to be reviewed and recertified every X amount of time. Had a lot of conversation around budgetary amendments, particularly those that are made on the floor and the public hearings around those, as well as talking about having a summary of all outstanding bonds in a publicly consumable and easily discoverable place. And then finally had some very broad, or not finally, but then had some very broad conversation around affordable housing, which was the most recommended topic that our committee received, and I think the most popular topic overall. And so had quite a few different places where we felt like, mostly in Section 7, it could be incorporated in ways big and small. And so working with Bernard to figure out which of those are realistic and within the bounds of the charter, and which of those would make more sense as potential legislative or executive actions that would fall to the other branches of government to potentially pick the ball up with and run at a later date. And then finally, we talked about the procurement section 5.16 and had some suggestions there based on the conversation that we had earlier as a full convention that we thought might address some of the concerns Mr. Pendrell had, and I believe Mr. Fox as well, while still incorporating that increase.
Okay, great. Finally, Human Resources and Legislative.
This is Tim Pendrell. We met late into the night. We discussed increasing the number of council members to 9 to account for the large growth of the population and size of the districts. That was a recommendation from Janet Bonnet and Senator Wayne. We recommended adding as state law prescribes to residency limits. We felt 6 months wasn't long enough, but that there is currently an issue with state statute on that. Discussed adding not living in a district as a means for removal of office. And we talked about the redistricting implications with that as well. We recommended clarifying that a vacating council person cannot vote for their replacement, just to simplify that and make sure it's understood so we don't have any confusion going forward. We discussed, talked about the language to allow the council to cancel a meeting in emergency. I think that's on today's agenda. And then when discussing 2.12, we talked about having it just refer to 8.111 as far as official publications go and make sure those two are consistent. We discussed eliminating 2.15, which I believe was the, I think that's franchises. For section 2.07, which was talking about the removal of the mayor with doctors, we pretty much wanted to wait and see what the other committee was working on, make sure that those two sections would be the same. And then with Article 6, the only recommendation we had was expanding the prohibition of city employees engaging in political campaign activities while on duty to apply to all elections, and that it would apply to civil service protected members of the cabinet. And that was the only change we had that we talked about for that article.
Okay, good. Bernard, now is the idea that these committees will get the recommendations to you, you'll put something together, and next week we'll discuss them and vote on them, or?
My intention is whether any potential charter amendments that a committee suggests or somebody asks that I put into some language, that I would do similar to what I did here. I would put it in a document so that it would be available for the members here. It's also posted on the city's website so people can take a look at it. And then we would have language that we could actually discuss. Hopefully next week, and I'm imagining the week after that we'll still have more.
Cal, can I real quick?
Sure, you bet.
Sorry, I was late. The governance committee, can I give our report?
You can.
Okay.
Somebody summarized it, but
Did somebody already summarize it?
Since you were the note taker, apparently.
I was.
Let's go do that.
So hopefully I don't go over too much. There was discussion of loopholes in the city charter that were similar to the health director issue. That was already resolved with city council, and we discussed that there are currently no issues of individuals who are not supervised or can be terminated if necessary by an elected official. We talked about the future of the charter convention. There was a member of the public who wanted to have each council member appoint an individual from their district and then have the mayor appoint one member, but from each district. Our discussion centered around the fact that the way the state law is written, it states that the mayor appoints and the city council approves, but there are no boundaries or no expectations for where they are approved from. So we recommend that we maintain the way that charter convention members are chosen, but we can add the following restriction: that they have to be at least 18 years of age and a resident of Omaha for a minimum of 6 months. There was discussion of the addition of 2 new city council districts and increasing the amount of time to be living in the district, currently 6 months, which I understand a couple other committees talked about as well. And we came to the same conclusion that those are state laws that have to be changed at the legislative level. And we recommended that the city's lobbyists talk to state officials about making those changes. The council members voting on their replacements was also something that came up. Apparently it caused much consternation when Rich Pauls helped to appoint his successor. Historically, they had not, but as Rich had not yet resigned his seat, he was still a member of the council, and that was considered viable. So our recommendation is we change this specific wording so that city council's members can't vote on their own replacements. And finally, someone had talked about term limits for the mayor. Our discussion revolved around the need for people to make their own choices and the desire for changes to happen with term limits. Basically, if people don't like what a mayor is doing, they will vote that person out of office. Our recommendation is if this is something the public feels strongly about, we recommend they gather enough support to do a ballot initiative to make it something so it's not just a very small number of people making that decision. We did have a member of the public sitting in with us, Wes Dodge, talking about ranked choice voting and changing the mayoral and city council elections to coincide with presidential and gubernatorial elections. Our discussion focused on whether it would make voters more or less likely to participate. Cost savings were also discussed, but these are also not things that the city has the ability to change. So we are encouraging the city lobbyists to talk about this at the state level if this is something that they want to change. That's it.
Thank you. Bernard, you going to talk?
Well, I figured I'd introduce. I do want to correct one misstatement I made earlier. I said that the governance committee recommended 8.01 and 8.105. They actually represented 2.06 and 8.15.
Okay.
Just to make it clear. So the first item on your agenda, item A, concerns Charter Section 2.02. That's the section that deals with qualifications of city council members. And you'll note there are two alternate sets of language. One is the one that I think was proposed by several of the city officials, and that is changing the qualification time period for a city council member from 1 year to 6 months to make it consistent with state law. The second one came from the HR Legislative Committee, which I think recognized that maybe there's a hope that maybe legislatively it'll be changed, but to make it clear that point people who are interested in running for city council to state law as a basis for those periods of time. So obviously those are two different alternatives, and quite frankly, if it's the will of the Charter Convention, you could do something totally different or some mix of the two. So.
Okay. What we're going to do going on here, I'll open this up to any public comments, then comments from the committee, and then hopefully we'll get a motion either to, let's see, a motion to recommend, which will push it on to the council, or a motion to table. Okay? So first of all, anybody from the public want to comment on this particular item? Opening the public hearing, that's what I was doing. Seeing no comments, we'll close the public hearing. Comments from the committee or motion? You've got two items before you.
I think my only comment is, let's see, are we down 5 people, and should we vote on it today or wait for them
The
to?
rules say that we can vote if we have 8 people.
Right.
So I guess if the committee would prefer to have more people, we can put that off, and then that'll slow the progress down.
What will be,
I see why you want to have more people here too. So
Could we have a vote, and if it's 8 or 9, which would pass whether we had all 15 members here or not, move that forward, and then anything below that, we could move it to a future agenda to reconsider?
Could do something like
I'm seeing
that.
a no from the city clerk.
Yeah, right, all we need is
Right.
8 votes. Can't do what?
Okay.
Table it, okay. Okay. We'll just, if
I mean, you could
throw enough votes,
could
it'll be tabled.
theoretically amend your rules,
We could,
amend the
yeah.
bylaws to do it, to require a supermajority to move it forward. But again, that's.
Okay, any other comments on these items? Motions? Motion?
I would say for discussion, of the two, I do think we need to make some amendment here to make it more clear and in line with state law. I would personally lean more towards the recommendation from the HRN Legislative Committee, keeping it at the current amount in the city charter, but then adding the rider as state law prescribes.
And by the way, I think these will be mutually exclusive. Whichever one you recommend to go on, goes on, the other one, you table. Okay. Motion? Somebody?
Was that a motion, Andrew?
Motion to table discussion on section 2.02 to a future meeting.
So moved.
We agreed
Yeah.
that it'll be a motion, because tabling it means it won't be considered. How about just a motion to lay over, where you make a friendly amendment to the motion and the second, just to make the record more clear? Is that fair?
It's fair, but we work so hard on it. Just saying.
Okay, I guess a vote. Do we have a second?
Angie?
Can we have a little more discussion on why we're waiting to, I mean, there's 10 of us here out of 15, right? I mean, next week, maybe others won't be present. I mean, I also want buy-in from as many members as possible, but we have to, I think, start making decisions and moving forward at some point.
Amen.
So what we could do is deny the layover and then vote on the motion to recommend, or to table if that's your desire. I guess the other way to approach it is, if you want to withdraw it and the second withdraws it.
I withdraw the motion to lay over the amendment.
Angie?
I would second that.
Okay. Then we need a motion either to recommend to the council or to table. I would say the motion ought to be either recommend the first one and table the second one, or vice versa. The first one is just 6 months, the second one is, or is prescribed by state law.
Can we have a discussion about that?
Yes.
Or, okay, so I would prefer that we do it as prescribed by state law, because that means we won't be back here every time. We want to change it as the state does make adjustments. We'll flow with that. So I think it would make sense to make that part of what we're doing today.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think the state legislature maybe not frequently, but occasionally takes up this topic, and it would be nice to tie it back to state law, and that way if it changes, they don't have to go through this exercise again.
Other comments?
Does adding in there, it currently says 12 months, or 6 months, correct?
It says 1 year.
Or 1 year. So does keeping in there the 1 year, or as state law prescribes, keeping in there that 1 year mark, does that give validity to the fact what we would recommend as a prudent time period? I'm just asking the question.
I think by adding, or as prescribed by state law, that would mean a candidate would then go to the state law and see what that is, and
Which they would have to do anyway.
yes. Other comments?
Just to kind of second off that, it would, if we moved it to 6 months, that would basically be that we are accepting that that's long enough. So it would be an easier argument with state law that we've already said that we want it 1 year, but realize that it's not. So it's, for argument's sake, yes, it would. But definitely moving it to 6 months would be like, we're done with this as a city, and 6 months is great, and we love the state law.
And that would be the first one.
Yeah.
Proposal here.
My question would be, are we open this up to challenge because we have something that could be different than what state law says? If we keep it at 6 months, I'm gonna turn that off because that echo is ridiculous. If we say 6 months in our ordinance or prescribed by state law, could someone challenge that within the city to say, well, I live within the city and this is what the city charter says on one end of it. I know the state law says something different, but I'm running for something within the city.
I know that been some cases in the past that pretty much said 6 months is the appropriate time frame. The city's always taken the position, at least recently, and recently I mean the last 20 years, that it should be 6 months because of a number of these other cases. So if you put 6 months in the charter, that, I guess, codifies it and makes it clear, right or wrong. I know some people would prefer to live here longer in order to be eligible, but I'm not sure that's reality.
Yeah, if the ultimate question is the language in the second one, the suggestion by the HR legislative where it adds or a state law prescribes, does that increase the likelihood of a lawsuit? I don't know that it does. I certainly don't think that language is unclear. I don't think it's particularly susceptible to a challenge. So if we were to make that amendment, you know, part of the reason that I think the HR, and I don't want to speak for him, but part of the reason I think the HR and Legislative Committee, and following up, I think, with one of the comments that I think you made, Tim, when at our first meeting, which was that, you know, if people look at this and they see 1 year, maybe it was John who made it, and a friend of theirs looked at it and said, oh, I can't do it because they'd only been a resident for 7 or 8 months. This at least puts people on notice, okay, there's another source I need to check. So it accomplishes that, but also accomplishes, I think, as Mr. Pendrell indicated, maybe a way of expressing that the 6-month time period that's in state law might not quite be long enough, which it appears to be the sentiment of quite a number of people on the Charter Convention.
However, we're not going to change that here.
No, you're not.
So if you look at what takes precedent, we can keep talking, but we had a long conversation. I almost missed the Warriors game because we had such long conversation. And it was great conversation, but these are things we take into consideration. And I think they're great questions to talk about as a large group so that you're also informed of what the options are. Great dialogue.
Can I ask not to prolong, very quick question? Was one consideration to say, is a resident in the city and district or any aforementioned by the city as state law prescribes, taking out the 1 year and just putting it as state law prescribes, not putting 6 months, not putting 1 year, just referring it back to the state statute?
It sounds like that was one recommendation, and I don't know, it sounds like that was one recommendation. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
We talked about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tim.
It was considered, and the main thing was what we kept going back to was communicating that we think 1 year is good, but not confusing somebody who's looking at it, so that they would know that state law does override this. But that was pretty much the dialogue on the issue, was keeping the 1 year but not having it contradict the reality.
And kind of from my standpoint, maybe a little selfishly, I'd prefer to have the state less involved in anything we do and leave it up to the city. So, do we have a motion?
We are not. McPherson, I move that on Article 2, Section 2.02, we add a phrase saying, or as state law prescribes.
Reddick here, second.
And you're making that recommendation that the city council move forward with that particular?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And in conjunction with that the other one is tabled.
Yep.
The first one, okay?
Et cetera, yes.
Okay, let's vote.
Fox.
Aye.
Kauth. McPherson.
I feel like a pirate, yes.
Morgan. Yes. Pendrell.
Yes.
Plecker.
Yes.
Prestai.
Yes.
Quinn.
Yes.
Reddick.
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay, that'll go on to the council. Next one's 2.05. Bernard will give us a synopsis of that.
Yep, and this is another one that came from the HR and Legislative Committee. And again, the language that was inserted, you can obviously see, basically concludes that if you're forfeiting your position in the city council, if you cease to be a resident of the city council district that a person was elected to represent. There's obviously two different concerns that you have here. If people move outside of the district, voluntarily, this particular provision would indicate that they're forfeiting their position on the city council. I know there was some concern that because of redistricting, there are occasions where somebody may, through no fault of their own, ended up being outside of the district which they were elected, at least for a portion of their term. We could throw in additional language. It's not written here, but I tried to come up with at least something we could if it was the convention as a whole wanted to address the second issue. We could obviously include a caveat that read something unless this occurs as a result of redistricting, in which case the council member may serve out the remainder of their term. So that would, if someone voluntarily were to move out of their district, they would forfeit their city council position. If we added that caveat, that additional language, it would preserve those people that happen to be, again, I leave that in there. That's just an option for the two of you. That's obviously not in this particular draft, but that might be another thing you may want to consider. And hopefully I did a decent job of describing that, Tim. So
You did.
Okay, thanks. We'll have a public hearing. Any comments from the public on this one? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Comments from the committee? Okay, is there a motion then?
So moved.
To recommend to the city council?
To recommend section 2.05 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, then let's vote.
Fox,
Aye.
Kauth, McPherson,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Pendrell,
Yes.
Plecker, Presti,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay, we'll move to the next one, section 2.06, and again, Bernard will give us a short intro.
this particular amendment was proposed by the Governance Committee. I know there was also discussion in the Human Resources and Legislative Committee, but basically intended to address what we'll call the Rich Paul situation by inserting language in 2.06 indicating the council member who's vacating the seat being filled shall not vote for his or her replacement. In some instances, if somebody has died, they don't have that ability, but in some instances, like this particular case where somebody takes another position, there is a potential that you may vote for your replacement, vote for the replacement prior to the time that you've actually left the council. So that's intended to clarify the concern that was raised, and I know Mr. Blake also raised and discussed it last week. So.
Okay, public hearing. I see a gentleman who would like to speak.
Scott Blake, 2316 North 52nd Street. I'd like to call it the Colleen Brennan situation. I think Rich Pauls is a great city council person. And really, what I came here today to say is I did some more research, and the vacancy replacement process is broken. And the big indicator from that is 70% of appointed members. So 70% of appointed members lose when they run for re-election. Compare that to an elected incumbent wins 80% of the time. And so we all know that Colleen Brennan was only here for 145 days. She lost re-election. And then compare this process to other vacancy replacements. Just recently, Roger Garcia, when Commissioner Boyle passed away, he was appointed to the Douglas County Commissioners. And it was really nice to watch. I think it was, in that case, the commissioners don't vote. They have a whole different way of doing it. It was, geez, I can see his face. It's the Dan Ash, the county clerk, I think a treasurer. And the best part was they did public interviews. And so Roger Garcia came right here. It was broadcast on .com. I think the public even was able to come and ask great questions. During the city council, the Colleen Brennan situation, the city council did no interviews. They also did not require any signatures. This is the first time, in addition to the outgoing council member voting for the replacement, this is the first time the city council did not interview the applicants. And I was thinking, like, would the city charter, should we make an amendment that says if you apply for a vacancy, you should go through an interview process? That just seems like, oh man. And then Ms. Cowles just got appointed to the legislator. I don't want to ask, but I assume there was did Ricketts just pull your name out of a hat? There was an interview, yeah, so. And then there was Mr. Kennedy, who's not here this week. He asked a really good question. I hope maybe we can get an answer to that. Otherwise, thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you. Any other public input? With that, the public hearing is closed. Comments from the committee or a motion?
So his recommendation, McPherson speaking, his recommendation, as I heard it stated, is that we mirror a process that was, that he saw that would include an interview. I think that's what he was referencing. Seems reasonable to me. It's not something, the HR committee who worked really hard, that wasn't one of our recommendations, but it is a reasonable recommendation.
Kaus, and I will say that Millard Public Schools recently went through the process of hiring a new superintendent, and the public was involved in the interview process for the final three, and that was really great to actually sit in on. So I appreciate the need to have more transparency, and also the interview process is pretty important.
Fox. I testified for Roger Garcia during that appointment, and I did enjoy the process. The three people that you were referring to were the Don Klein, John Ewing, and Dan Esch were the three that made that decision. I agree with Kathleen's comment about just having public input. So I do agree with what you're saying, Scott, and that's just my opinion.
Reddick here, I have a question. Is there any time, is there a deadline in which that either the interview would have to take place or that seat would have to be filled, which may not allow for an interview process?
I don't believe there's any time limit on filling a seat on the city council. It's up to the council.
Then I would agree that an interview process would probably allow the public to be more informed, and at least people from that district, especially if redistricting happens.
Sounds like the group's suggesting an amendment to what we already have here.
Yeah, my suggestion, frankly, would be, because I think there's a couple different ideas out here, that if it sounds like there's some desire to tweak what's here, that we would lay this over or put it on file, and then we could come forward with something else. Because I think one suggestion is an interview process. Obviously, the process that the county uses is an interview process, but it's an interview process that's conducted by not the county commissioners themselves, but somebody, which is another process, whereas a lot of times it's done by the way this particular charter amendment is currently written. It allows the council to decide the method for determining how someone is qualified. Obviously, what we're talking about here is you want to provide more description on what you believe or what we believe should be part of that qualification process, which is fine, but I guess my recommendation would be to lay it over to allow us to try to address some of those concerns and find some language, maybe refer it back to the HR and Legislative Committee or the Governance Committee. I think it arguably falls under both, but one of those two committees to get back together and provide a recommendation then for the full board to consider next week or the week after.
We are willing to work with the other committee, the Governance Committee. McPherson, I move that for Article 2, Section 2.05, that it be laid, is it 6, sorry, my fault, that it is laid over.
I'd second that.
To June 30th.
To June 30th.
Yeah, 6:30 to the 6:30 June 30th meeting.
Yep.
2022.
We have a second?
I would second that.
Roll call?
Fox.
Aye.
Kauth. McPherson.
Yes.
Morgan.
Yes.
Pendrell.
Yes.
Plecker. Pristine.
Yes.
Quinn.
Yes.
Reddick.
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Shall be laid over. Next proposed amendment is Charter Section 2.10.
And you have, before you, you have two different proposals. One, I think I based on what was some feedback that was provided before, and the second was based on, hopefully, my correct interpretation of the notes from the HR and Legislative Committee. In any event, you'll notice that two of the three changes are the same in both. One is that changing the language so that the council schedules meeting regularly as opposed to shall meet. And then the last part, which is in the event there's an emergency meeting, that the public is notified at the same time as the council. The addition in the bottom amendment that's before you provides an ability right now the charter requires that the council meet a minimum two times a month. As was discussed by the HR and Legislative Committee, as was discussed by the city clerk and her recommendations, and the mayor and her recommendations, there was a concern that there may be times as a result of an emergency that it may not be possible. It made it difficult to do so. So I added a caveat, unless unable to do so as a result of an emergency declared by federal or state government. You'll note that I did not insert city government or the mayor. That's certainly something you could do. The reason that I did not was the feeling that I didn't think it would particularly work to allow the mayor of the city to declare an emergency that would therefore after not allow the council of that particular city to have to meet. So I was worried about the potential for a conflict. The language that I got from the HR committee did include the mayor as well. I did omit that because of my concern, and that I thought was it appropriate for the mayor of the city of Omaha to be able to declare an emergency that would then that would allow the council not to meet. It seemed to me if we're going to have a declaration of state of emergency, the federal or state have that mechanism, and frankly, the city council's involved in the process for declaring an emergency in the city anyway. So anyway, obviously you can all choose to disagree with me, but I wanted to at least explain my motivation.
Thank you. Public hearing, any comments from the public on this issue? Seeing none, public hearing's closed. Comments from the committee? Thoughts?
More question. On the second option, where you add unless able to do so as a result of emergency declared by federal or state government, would it still need to even strike meet and change the schedule meetings? Because they would still have to meet twice a month as they do anyway. But the thought behind changing it to schedule was the language that in the event of emergency, they can meet one and still within their qualifications, but unless unable to do so as a result of an emergency as declared by federal or state government, that might take care of that issue, that if they had to cancel a meeting so that we wouldn't, because one of the things we did discuss was that by making it schedule, we're kind of saying they don't have to meet, and it could be looked at that way.
So your suggestion is to keep quotation meet and quotation, and then delete scheduled meetings?
Yes.
And do the rest of it
And
as
then
the
do the
second
rest of it.
option.
Okay. Comments? Let me ask, is that an amendment to that particular section?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second?
Yes. Yes, McPherson. I second it.
Comments on the amendment? Is there a motion to adopt the amendment?
We have the motion.
You do? Okay. Okay. Let's vote on the amendment.
Fox.
Aye.
Kauth. McPherson.
Yes.
Morgan.
Yes.
Pendrell.
Yes.
Plecker. Pristine.
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes?
Motion passed.
Then we vote as amended?
Yep. We need a motion in a second.
A motion to
Approve as amended.
approve as amended. Thank you.
I'd make a motion to approve as amended.
Second. Roll call.
Roll call.
Aye.
Kauth,
Aye.
McPherson,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Pendrell,
Yes.
Plecker,
Yes.
PristI,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Next one is Charter Section 2.15. Again, Bernard will explain it.
This is an amendment that was requested by the Human Resources and Legislative Committee, and I think follows up on some discussion that Ms. Bonet and I had at some point in time. We currently, the only franchise we have is a cable TV franchise. There's state law that provides how that's to be set up, as there are for most of the franchises. I think the feeling was that this particular language had kind of been mooted and as a result of state law, and the reality was the utilities and/or telecommunications companies, which would be where one would be seeking a franchise, all those are already controlled by state law, and there was no need for this particular provision. Obviously, this provision requires a public vote should there be a new franchise established.
Okay, public hearing. Any comments from the public? See none, public hearing's closed. Comments or motions from the committee?
And for clarity's sake, McPherson, we're eliminating this section is what we recommended, just for clarity. Okay. McPherson, I move that we recommend to the city council for section 2.15 that on this particular section is eliminated.
Is there a second?
Fox, second.
Okay. Any comments before we vote? Okay, let's do a roll
I
call.
guess
I'm
one
sorry.
question I would have is there likelihood in the future that there are new situations that would create the need for franchises or something that would be considered a franchise?
Boy, we haven't had one in decades. Probably not. It's probably what's going to be controlled by state law in any event.
I mean, your typical franchises are electrical providers, water providers, telecommunication providers. Those are the things that you typically have franchises. All those, the state has usurped the law
Yeah.
in all those particular areas. But most of them already exist, but there would potentially be the need for new telecommunications or other providers, but state law controls on that at this point. And federal law, frankly.
More so federal law, you're right. Motion? Do we have it? Okay, thanks. Good job. Okay, roll call.
Fox,
Aye.
Kauth,
Aye.
McPherson,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Pendrell,
Yes.
Plecker,
Yes.
PristI,
No.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes?
Motion passed 9-1.
Okay. Next one, section 3.02. Mr. Indenbosch.
And I brought this one forward. This is one that obviously was suggested by several of the city, I think the city clerk and the election commissioner. I want to make it clear, this obviously is intended to change 3.02 to be consistent with state law. Obviously, we made an amendment to 2.02 a few minutes ago, which we kept the original language and inserted the phrase "or a state law prescribes" in there. I did tell Ms. Bonet when she reached out to me that though I didn't have that recommendation, I do feel it's appropriate that we're consistent between 2.02 and 3.02, and that I would pass that sentiment along to the Charter Convention as well. So even though there is not a written one, if it's the desire of the Charter Convention, an alternative way would be to keep the "for 5 consecutive years immediately prior to taking office" in and insert the phrase "or as state law prescribes" to be consistent with 2.02. So anyway, those a second alternative that isn't written there, but it's something that I do think you want to consider because you do want to be consistent between those two sections.
Okay, public hearing? Any comments? Seeing none, the public hearing's closed. Comments from the committee or motion?
I would motion to amend the recommended change for section 3.02 to include or as state law prescribes to mirror the earlier vote.
Comments on the amendment?
I had a question, maybe open for discussion. And looking at this qualifications office for the mayor, is there a question of ageism by putting 25 on there versus someone not a minor? I'll use this example. We discussed having someone 18 years of age to have to sit on a committee similar to this, correct? In the state of Nebraska, that's still considered a minor. I don't know if they could take the oath without a parent's permission. If we put 25, and then where could challenges come from that? We just had a young man, 17 years of age, open a business for rolled ice cream. It's delicious, please go check it out. So could there be a challenge of age to this particular amendment? If we had someone 24, fantastic, everybody loves them.
I guess my comment would be that federal government has restrictions. Be in Congress, to be president, be a senator, you have to be a certain age. It's probably not too uncommon. Plus, I would also add, I think 25 that's pretty young. So I don't know how much younger you want to go. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. Other comments? Any motion on the 25? Okay, hearing none. The amendment pending is to add or as state law provides. Any comments on that? Are we ready for a vote? Okay, let's do a roll call.
Fox,
Aye.
Kauf. Aye. McPherson,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Pendrell. Yes. Plucker,
Yes.
Presti.
No.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
No.
Kratz.
Yes?
Motion passed 8-2.
Oh, then as amended. Sorry. Have to vote on as amended? Okay.
For discussion's sake, I would like to point out, and I am part of the reason for this confusion because I was reading a little too fast. I need to finish my Diet Coke to get a little more caffeine. Currently, if this passes as amended, it will say 6 months or as state law prescribes. So technically, we'll be saying, I believe, right, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that to be a city council member, you need to have at least 1 year of residency or state law prescribes. But for mayor, we think it's fine. Right?
Be 6 months.
Well,
I think
and
it's
again,
five.
I was going to ask a clarifying question because I was under the impression, based on the discussion that I had, that what the section was going to read, we were going to leave the original language in there for 5 consecutive years immediately prior to taking office, or as state law prescribes, and shall be at least 25 years of age. I was going to ask whoever made the motion to make it, see if that's what the amendment was for or not.
Right now, the way it stands, it's 6 months or as
Well,
state law provides. Is
I don't
is that
think,
where we want to go?
I'm not sure the amendment was clear. The amendment said insert that language. It didn't say, and that's why I was going to ask for some clarification on who made the amendment. I can't recall who made it. I think Andrew made it.
And that's where I got it mixed up in my head was thinking, keeping the original language, adding as state law prescribes, but the words that came out of my mouth were just adding that on to the 6 months, and that's where that would not mirror what we did for the city council,
I
which
think-
could be fine, but.
So what you're saying is, I guess you want to change your amendment,
Which has already been adopted.
which has already
It's
been
already been
adopted.
adopted, so that's why I wanted to bring up the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to just make sure we didn't pass the next one as well and have a harder mess to untangle.
So that section would read,
So with the original language, the section would read, a candidate for the office of mayor shall, at the time of filing for the office, be a qualified elector and resident of the city or an area annexed by the city for 5 consecutive years immediately prior to taking office, or as state law prescribes, and shall be at least 25 years of age.
Can we confirm with the clerk what is the amendment that was just passed? Is it that language? Okay.
What we passed was 6 months
I guess I'm not
or
sure
as
that
state
I
law
completely-
provides.
So life, McPherson, life is not perfect, and neither are we, so we'll have a redo. But before we do that, I do have a question. So there were two folks, one of which made the motion, I think, who said no. I'm curious, can I ask this question? Was the no because we didn't change the 25? Is that why?
No, I said no because I was fearful that it would be the 6 months or is otherwise prescribed by
Oh.
state law, not because of that. So that was mostly because it dawned on me after we had closed the discussion and we were in the voting period that we couldn't stop for discussion at that point in time, so.
Okay, I'm just curious. And?
It was in regards to the language, which did include 25 years of age.
Oh, okay. All right. I just, we had 8, but I just want to know, curious minds want to know. Thank you.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
guess we're at a position where we'll vote on the revised amendment. And
So right now, it's been amended to say 6 months or as state law prescribes.
Right.
And you'll vote on that. If that passes, that obviously is the recommendation to the
That's already passed.
council. No, the amendment's passed, not the full,
I'm sorry,
not the
the
amended
amendments, yeah.
version. If that amendment if the amended version fails, then you have the item back in front of you, and there could be a second amendment to accomplish what Mr. Pristow was now talking about, and you could do that amendment, but again.
So to get where I think everybody's going, we want to take a vote on the amendment, on the article as amended, turn that down, we'll come back and then make another amendment. Okay? Roll call.
Fox,
We're voting, this is the one that we are voting, okay, so no.
Kauth, McPherson,
Nay.
Morgan,
No.
Pendrell. No. Plucker,
No.
Pristai,
No.
Quinn,
No.
Reddick,
No.
Kratz.
No.
Motion failed.
Okay, now we want a motion. What do we want the motion?
I motion that the recommendation presented by the committee on section 3.02 changes the language to, as it reads, with the addition of as prescribed.
I think you
By
want to
state
say
law.
is, keep the 5 consecutive.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Oh,
That's how I
okay.
messed up. So it's 4 or 5 consecutive years immediately prior to taking office or as prescribed by state law.
No, 3.02.
Yeah, to mirror 2.02. Yep.
To mirror 2.02, okay.
So let me verbalize what I think the motion to amend is, and then we can decide if that's the case. So the motion to amend is to keep the original language that appears in 3.02 and to add after prior to taking office the phrase or as state law prescribes, which means the first sentence of 3.02 will read as follows. A candidate, if the amendment is adopted and is adopted as amended, a candidate for the office of mayor shall, at the time of filing for the office, be a qualified elector and resident of the city or an area annexed by the city for 5 consecutive years immediately prior to taking office or as state law provides, and shall be at least 25 years of age. Okay, so
Is that the amendment? I guess a motion, Andrew? Do we have a second?
Motion to pass the language that Bernard just recited for the convention.
And do we have a second?
Second that motion, Morgan.
to
Okay.
adopt the amendment.
Discussion?
That's why Bernard gets paid the big bucks.
At least he's getting paid, Jay. Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, and that's on the amendment. And so you have to adopt that,
Yep.
and then you have to move as amended.
Right. Let's do a roll call.
Fox,
Aye.
Kauth, McPherson,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Pendrell. Plucker.
Yes.
Pristai,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
No.
Kratz.
Yes,
Motion passed 9-1.
and as amended?
We need a motion.
I would make a motion to approve as amended.
Second.
Second.
Vote?
Fox,
Aye.
Kauth, McPherson,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Pendrell, Plucker,
Yes.
Presti,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Next one is 3.12 regarding the Public Works Department. And Bernard, do you want to make any comments? This is pretty self-evident, but
This one is pretty self-evident. This was suggested by the Public Works Department. Of all the ones that were suggested by them, this was, I thought, in many ways the most innocuous. And I think our discussion last time kind of did that, frankly, just to include stormwater management, which has become a significant part of what our Public Works Department does. So happy to answer any questions. I think it kind of speaks for itself.
public hearing? Anybody want to comment? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Whoa. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Hello, Dewan Lamont Hayes, 1707 Park Avenue. Yes, Dewan, D-A-W-A-U-N-E, Lamont, L-A-M-O-N-T, Hayes, H-A-Y-E-S, 1707 Park Avenue. It is as simple as adding stormwater management, but something that we must recognize is that our drinking water is a very important resource in Omaha. And so when we're talking moving forward about climate resilience plans, talking about the future sustainability of the city, making sure that this language is in there and that Public Works has the authority to be effectual with stormwater management, as well as thinking about rain gardens and how we are utilizing the natural environment to help us with water retention moving forward, parks and recreation. So I'm adding these details out there so that can make sure to consider them in the grander scope. Because stormwater can be like, oh, that's just a thing, but it's very, very important. And the more parking we add, the more impermeable surfaces we add, the more damage we do to our stormwater. If you would like to have if you have any questions or like any more information about stormwater management, as well as helping a way that residents can participate in stormwater management, I have plenty of information on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other comments? Okay, public hearing's closed. Comments from the committee or a motion?
Just Quinn here. In our committee, we did talk about the master plan, and does that include sustainability and some language that Mr. Hayes, brought up, and whether that is an amendment to the charter, or is that something that we can work with in the master plan? That was just some conversation that we had.
Initially, my thought is perhaps that's more, it should be involved in the master plan. We put all of these issues and items together, and then you plan that out over the next 10 years or so. That's just my thought. I don't think you want to get too detailed in the charter as far as what should be done or shouldn't be done. Other comments? A motion?
Reddick here. I think there is language in the master plan regarding green and our mayor's plan for us to be a green city, or how we move forward with that already. So I think you bring up an excellent point. I don't know that the details of it would go in this amendment, but there is discussion, to address your comment, there is discussion about having the master plan more available to the community as a whole.
And I do think that, as this is something that was brought up by that particular department, there are probably other ways that we could consider potentially including it. But if the individuals that would be responsible for this are suggesting that it would be beneficial for their jobs, then I think it makes sense to include it there, just to remove doubt.
Okay.
I can't remember your name, but Dewan? Okay. Dewan. Before you leave, I'd like to get your contact information, because we're actually working on a permeable surface bill in the legislature for January. which will be pretty good.
Do we have a motion?
I would make a motion to recommend to the city council to amend section 3.12 to add stormwater management.
A second?
Press I, second.
Okay. Roll call.
Fox,
Aye.
Kauth, McPherson,
Yes.
Morgan,
Yes.
Pendrell, Plucker,
Yes.
Prestai,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Reddick,
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Next one is Charter Section 8.01, nominations and elections. Mr. Endenbosch.
Thank you. This particular charter amendment was proposed, I believe, by the election commissioner, and I think Ms. Butler discussed this at a previous meeting. Kind of the reason for this is right now, without there being a particular date and time, there are people who seek petitions multiple years beforehand, whatever else. This would provide some certainty and would provide candidates an opportunity requiring petitions to be available in October 1st prior to the year of the primary election. Primary election generally occurs, I believe, in April. So it would provide a 6-month window for people to be able to gather the signatures. In any event, it was requested by the election commissioner, appeared to be one that there was at least some thought to support by the convention, so I put it forward for your consideration.
Public hearing? Any comments? Yes, sir. Mr. Hayes.
Dewan Lamont Hayes, 1707 Park Avenue. I just wanted to get clarification. Is this specifically for city council and mayor, and then extending the window for petition collection? Just some clarification for the record. I myself have petitioned for mayor, and collecting 1,000 signatures during a pandemic as a person who doesn't own a car in Omaha, Nebraska is very difficult. So just thinking about, accessibility and stuff like that. So if there could be a clarification on what exactly is being extended or opened up, is this making it more accessible or less, and then for which offices?
So the simple answer is because this is the City of Omaha Charter, and we can only address things that the City of Omaha Charter has the ability. So this is both the mayor and the city council elections, and that's all it applies to. Secondly, I think the reason for this request was there is no clarity currently in the statutes. It results in some people asking for not knowing when they're available, a certain amount of uncertainty for potential candidates. The suggestion was October 1st, I think, was to provide a 6-month period. Quite frankly, even if a different date were suggested, the desire to have some certainty, therefore the candidates as well as the election commissioner would be a certain, hey, here's a date certain when we know that these petitions are going to be available for us to be able to collect for the upcoming election. I don't think the 6-month time period was not intended to make it onerous on people. Historically, I think most people do pick up their packets in December or January time period, but this was intended to make sure. I mean, it was a recommendation to have a date certain and to avoid some of the uncertainty that happens currently without there being a date anywhere out there.
Other comments? Mr. Hayes, I see your hand up.
If the 6 months is a recommendation, then might I suggest a year?
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, public
Can I
hearing.
add one?
What?
So a year, again, if people move out of the city, then those signatures are void, which I think is why the election commission wanted the 6 months.
1 to 6 months as opposed to a longer period. I suppose it might make it easier for the election commissioner to certify the signatures. Okay. Public hearing's closed. Comments from the committee or a motion?
I understand Mr. Hayes' point, but boy, moving out of the city, 6 months seems like you just want to make sure those people that are endorsing you are still living in the city that you're going to represent.
I would agree. I've run a petition drive before, and obviously having valid signatures is what makes or breaks whether your petition is successful. So I think this is a nice balance between having a time certain but giving enough time to get those signatures, and also with that 6 months, I think you're ensuring that more of the signatures will be valid. With that, if there's no further discussion, I would make a motion to recommend to the City Council to add that language in 8.01.
There a second?
I second.
Roll call?
Fox.
Aye.
Kauth.
Aye.
McPherson.
Yes.
Morgan.
Yes.
Pendrell.
Yes.
Plucker.
Yes.
Prestye.
Yes.
Quinn.
Yes.
Reddick.
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Next one is Charter Section 8.15. It's amendment to the Charter Review Committee.
And this particular amendment was suggested by the Governance Committee, and it applies to future people who sit in your seats. Obviously, currently there are very few requirements for those who sit on the Charter Review Convention. This would impose a requirement that in order to serve on the convention, you have to be at least 18 years of age. Certainly, the Charter Convention could recommend a different number if that was what they wanted, and also requires that an individual be a resident of the city or an area annexed by the city, and that language mirrors the language that we've used in other qualification portions of the code, of the charter, for a period of 6 months at the time of their appointment. So it would impose that 6-month requirement as being a city resident at the time that you served on the charter. Currently, there is no requirement that you be a city resident nor a resident for any specific period of time.
Thank you. Public hearing is open. Any comments? Seeing none, public hearing is closed. Comments or motion from the committee?
I just referenced my earlier comment regarding 18 years of age, which is considered a minor, and 19 years of age in the city, in the state we live in, which is where they'd be considered an adult.
Other comments? What do you want to make an amendment?
Open it up for other comments.
Okay.
I guess Ford, Bernard, or anyone else from the city department that would know, because you need to sign the oath and take the oath to be a member of the Charter Commission, but it seems like city employees need to take that as well, including, as talked about earlier, the lifeguards at the pool and a lot of others, I'm sure, under 18. So it seems that you can take that oath as a minor, have either on your own, or does a parent need to validate that in some way?
I think we do have people take an oath, and obviously the other thing is you can vote at the age of 18 as well, obviously, even though you're technically a minor for purposes of medical care and a lot of other reasons in the state of Nebraska. Mr. Reddick is absolutely correct. I do believe that we require our minors who are employees to have their oath validated by an adult.
Do we have a motion on this one?
I move that we accept the recommendation as written.
Second.
Roll call?
Fox.
Aye.
Kauth.
Aye.
McPherson.
Yes.
Morgan.
Yes.
Pendrell.
Yes.
Plucker.
Yes.
Prestye.
Yes.
Quinn.
Yes.
Reddick.
Yes.
Kratz.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay, I guess that's it for today. Is that right, Bernard?
It is.
Okay. Our next meeting is June 30th, which is next Thursday, I believe. At that time, I assume we'll have more motions to vote on. Okay. Do we have other business? Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Second that motion.
I can't. No, you can. Okay, we're adjourned.
Okay.